Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. Our topic today, Memory Care Deconstructed, Part 2. It's an exciting topic and we're going to get there in a minute. I have a few housekeeping announcements. This is Susan Ryan. I'm the Senior Director of the Greenhouse Project. We're delighted that you joined us for today's hot topic. Want to remind you that you will be in listen-only mode. All phone lines are muted, but at the end, we are going to save some time for questions. So please put your questions in the chat box so that our presenter today will be able to take those questions and we'll be able to have a conversation that way. In addition to that, I wanted to let everybody point your attention to our first slide, which is really talking about our Dementia Symposium. This is kind of a first ever event for the Greenhouse Project. We really are excited to feature Dr. Al Power and Beyond Memory Care, really thinking about new approaches for a new decade. And Dr. Al Power, I can't think of a better person to really kind of be our keynoter for this wonderful event. He is going to be joined with an all-star cast of folks that will really take us through some really engaging presentations and discussions on that first day. And then we're kind of excited because that evening you'll do a reception with us, and the next morning, Dr. Joycelyn Elders, the former Surgeon General, will be with us for another keynote presentation. And then you'll be able to visit Greenhouse Homes in Little Rock, Arkansas. We've got information on our website, and I really hope that we'll see many of you there in Little Rock, Arkansas for this Dementia Symposium. All right, let's get started. Let's get on to today's presentation. We have back Jennifer Carson, that's Dr. Jennifer Carson, who has a PhD in Recreation and Leisure Studies, an Aging, Health, and Wellbeing program from the University of Waterloo. Jennifer is serious about combating ageism and really improving the inclusion and well-being of elders with a particular interest in those that are living with dementia. We were talking earlier, just before the call started, about our passion just to really look at the inclusion of those living with dementia into our communities and not creating fabricated communities, but to really ensure that we are doing everything that we can to really value the intrinsic worth of these individual folks that happen to have a diagnosis with dementia. So I'm really going to get out of the way and let Jennifer continue with part 2, Memory Care Deconstructed. So thank you, Jennifer, for joining us again.
Thank you, Susan. Sorry about flipping through some slides there. I'm hoping that my screen is now visible. Does it show on your end?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for having me back for this exploration of unlocking and desegregating communities for people living with dementia. It's really an honor and pleasure to be a part of this discussion with all of you. When we got together last week, oops, I'm having a challenge advancing my slides again. There we go. When we got together last week, we took some time to really just explore the case for inclusive living. And together we explored a number of, moral, clinical, evidence-based, and demographic arguments, and really, I hope, engaged in some thoughtful and critical reflection on how we originally developed memory care as a field, what purpose it served, and really calling it into question. And so if you missed part 1, I think that it's still possible for you to access it through the Greenhouse if you want to engage with some of those arguments, which really help build a case for inclusive approaches to dementia care and support in the future. And so we did that last week. Today, what we're going to do is consider some practical pathways to inclusion. So if you found those arguments compelling, or maybe you felt compelled even prior to our call last week, which is likely the case because you signed on for this webinar in the first place, But if you're looking for some practical pathways to inclusion, we want to share those with you today, and then take a little bit of time to highlight some practice-based examples from provider communities that are really making strides and leading the way in the context of dementia inclusion. So I have a pretty ambitious hour in store for us. These are our objectives. First, we're going to consider what these practical and positive pathways to inclusion are. Then I'm going to share some of my research with a community based in Chapel Hill, North Carolina called Carrollwood's Retirement Community, and how we embarked on a participatory action research project together called the Quest Upstream to really better support people living with dementia in an inclusive setting. So I'll share a little bit about that research project, and then highlight some additional practice-based examples of dementia inclusive communities in North America, and then hopefully save a little bit of time for Q&A. And in the picture there are some of my partners from Carrollwood's Retirement Community. On part one, I was able to highlight some of my teachers. I did start by letting folks know that I'm a former memory care provider. I was really proud of the work that I did in the early days of building memory care communities. I helped open the first memory care community, the first standalone memory care community in Washington State. Just as recently as 3 years ago, is working for a segregated and locked memory care provider. So this has really been an evolution for me, an evolution in thought, an evolution in heart, an evolution in values. I didn't just wake up enlightened. I'm not one of those people. Unfortunately, I have to learn the hard way through trial and error. And I'm very grateful that I've had amazing teachers along the way, including my partners at Carrollwood's Retirement Community, which we call the Quest Upstream Community Action Team. Of course, Dr. Al Power, it's so exciting that he's coming to the Greenhouse event in May, not just coming, but headlining it. Dr. Al Power has definitely been one of my strongest teachers and a dear friend, and Al and I are in the process of writing a book together right now for Health Professions Press on the subject of dementia inclusion. Two amazing experts of lived experience, tremendous self-advocates, Phyllis Baer and Kate Swaffer, who have really taught me to think much more deeply and broadly about dementia inclusion and the fundamental rights of all people, including people who are living with dementia. My husband, Dr. Peter Reed, we talk about dementia inclusion at work. He's director of the Sanford Center for Aging at UNR, where I'm also on faculty. But we spend a lot of time talking about dementia inclusion at our kitchen table as well, because I am now also a family care partner of a person living with dementia. One of my 3 dads is living with vascular dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And so this subject of dementia inclusion really hits home. This is not just, I'm not just looking at this issue from a professional angle any longer. It's deeply personal, and I'm grateful for everything I've learned from my dad and my brother as my family navigates dementia inclusion for my dad. And then finally, I'm very grateful for everything that I have learned and all of the critical reflection inspired by the people living with dementia that I have locked in memory care over the years. And again, I am truly and deeply sorry. But again, quoting the late and great Maya Angelou, I did then what I knew how to do. And now that I know better, I will absolutely do better. And so thank you again to some of my teachers for informing the content that's in this presentation. So let's jump in. Our first objective, let's look at these practical and positive pathways to inclusion. Dr. Power and I, in our book, what we're doing right now is we've identified and are really fully exploring these 6 positive pathways to inclusion: reframing dementia, focusing on well-being, embracing complexity, negotiating upside and downside risk, leveraging technology respectfully, of course, and really how can we use great design to create an inclusive environment. But for the purposes of our webinar today, I don't have time to give you all 6. So I thought I'd start with the first 3, reframing dementia, focusing on well-being, and embracing complexity, and help us see the role that each of these pathways plays in supporting inclusion. So let's start with reframing dementia. This might look familiar to some folks on the webinar. This table shares some of the characteristics of a biomedical view of dementia against a social and relational view of dementia. And I know that dichotomies are dangerous. I will admit that I probably see the world of dementia care and support through both views. I think, like most people, we all see better when both of our eyes are wide open. But as I have this table up here, and you see these different characteristics of these different views, I want to ask each of you to consider, if you had dementia, which view would you prefer and why? If you had dementia, which of these views would you prefer and why? And then also, which view do you think is the most prevalent view within the senior living organization that you are most familiar with? And why is this an important question? Well, the assumptions and beliefs that we hold about dementia influence the way that we approach and regard and interact with persons who are living with dementia, and the opportunities that are afforded to people living with dementia. So what opportunities exist for people living with dementia when dementia is viewed as either a predictable or an unknowable world of doom and a fate worse than death? Well, not many. My doctoral supervisor back at the University of Waterloo in Canada, Dr. Sherry Dupuy, she describes some of the consequences when care partners see dementia through a biomedical only view. She explains that the biomedical only view really shapes how people living with dementia and their actions are judged. And there's a really strong tendency to medicalize expressions of feelings as care partners learn to see the world through the lens of so-called dementia behaviors. And this then impacts how the person is treated, how they're labeled, they become stigmatized. It limits choices and opportunities. It results in social inequality. It often fails to recognize and limit the contributions that people living with dementia can make in their own lives and in the lives of others. And it results in persons living with dementia feeling ignored, silenced, overlooked, overprotected, and then sadly, as people living with dementia internalize this biomedical view, it influences how they view themselves and their own lives. So how common is the biomedical view and this medicalization of feelings? Well, it's so common that there's an acronym for it, BPSD, Behavioral and Psychosocial Symptoms of Dementia. But when people living with dementia exhibit signs of stress or distress, it could include anger or sadness, fear, frustration, anxiety. This isn't a dementia behavior, it's communication. It's communication. And so I love this Christine Bryden, another powerful self-advocate and expert of lived experience. She says, look, you want to keep your acronym, that's great, but let's call it what it really is. It's a basic personal sign of distress. People living with dementia are in distress, and they are trying their best to communicate their needs to care partners, often unmet needs. And then Dr. Al Power, in his book, Dementia Beyond Drugs, or maybe I'm sorry, he's the author of Dementia Beyond Drugs and Dementia Beyond Disease. I'm not sure where he wrote about this, but I'm giving him credit. He calls it BPSOD, Behavioral and Psychosocial Symptoms of the Over-Medicalization of Dementia. And so what does this have to do with inclusion? Well, two things. We have to stop making assumptions about the needs and abilities of people living with dementia based on a biomedical only view, which greatly limits opportunities. And then secondly, we have to help people understand, including residents who are not living with dementia, that what they think of as so-called dementia behaviors are really a form of communication. And often it's a communication of distress. So instead of locking up those people with their behaviors, communities should really work proactively to support well-being in an effort to minimize or to eliminate distress. And then those so-called behaviors that other residents find so upsetting, well, they'll be much less of an issue. And this actually leads to the next pathway, which is focusing on well-being. You gotta love Dr. Al Power, who offers this decree in his second book, Dementia Beyond Disease. And it's such a wonderful passage in his book. It's such a great section, particularly because his first book included many non-pharmacological interventions. And so it just goes to show that I'm not the only person who seems to do a lot of critical reflection. So Al also did some critical reflection, wrote his second book and said, hey, look, folks, non-pharmacological interventions, they don't even work. They don't work. It's just an attempt to provide person-centered care within a biomedical mindset. And he explains that the entire field of dementia care and support is really dominated by downstream reactive interventions for people who are already in distress. But what if we stopped honing our skills as rescuers who can fish people out of the rivers of distress and instead go work upstream and to proactively prevent distress? So how do we do that? We focus on well-being. And so some of the benefits to focusing on well-being, according to Dr. Al Power, it really helps us see the person, helps us see the communication within the context of the whole person. It really helps us depathologize these communications of unmet need. It helps us to really recognize the power of historical, environmental, and relational contexts, and to focus on achievable and life-affirming goals, not interventions. And by focusing proactively on well-being, it helps bring all these new insights into who each person is as a unique and wonderful human being. It can really help us eliminate antipsychotic drug use and other interventions. And then finally, it's strengths-based and very proactive. So we need to get upstream and to focus on supporting well-being versus responding to distress downstream through either pharmacological or non-pharmacological interventions. So there are different frameworks to help us think about well-being and how to better support the well-being of a person living with dementia. This is a framework that Al uses in his book, Dementia Beyond Disease. It's based on a white paper that was written by the Eden Alternative, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this framework. This is the framework that I often work with. It's a framework that was developed through participatory action research with people who are living with dementia. And I was a graduate student working on this project that was under the leadership of Dr. Sherry Dupuy. But we worked with over 200 people living with dementia in this research project that probably lasted almost 2 years. And we really wanted to understand what it takes to live well with dementia. And people living with dementia told us this. They said, look, as long as we have opportunities to stay connected to these meaningful experiences, we can live well with dementia. And so this is a framework that I use. And I do often think, how can I help people living with dementia to stay connected to opportunities for being me, being with, seeking freedom, finding balance, making a difference, growing and developing, and having fun. And it just goes to show that people living with dementia have a lot to teach us, because I use this framework as I reflect on my own personal life and my own personal well-being, and it works rather well. So the next pathway to really supporting inclusion is to learn to embrace complexity. Learn to embrace complexity. So it's interesting, inspiration for my critical reflection seems to come from all different directions. One of those sources of influence was this book called Getting to Maybe: How the World is Changed by Wesley Zimmerman and Quinn. I was really drawn to the title of this book. I love that. Getting to Maybe. This book is for those who are not happy with the way things are and would like to make a difference. This book is for ordinary people who want to make connections that will create extraordinary outcomes. This is a book about making the impossible happen. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a book I have to read. And as I was reading the book, early into it, there was this passage, and it just hit me in the face like a ton of bricks. And as I was thinking about dementia care and support, the authors write, disasters occur when complex issues are managed or measured as if they are merely complicated or even simple. Disasters. I thought, wow, that's interesting. I wanted to learn more, and they wrote about how in complex systems, relationships and dialogue are the key, and that what we really need to do if we want to help make the impossible happen, we need to learn how to live and to work with uncertainty and to channel our inner sailor versus our inner cowboy or cowgirl. And so as I kept reading, by the end of the book, what I realized is that inclusive communities are not an easy proposition for control freaks who want a definitive answer. How do I know this? Because I am a reformed control freak. Honestly, in full disclosure, for most of my career, I wanted to be the cowgirl who rode into town or into the memory care community or into the assisted living or to the nursing home. I wanted to be that cowgirl who had the answers. And I'll tell you how well that worked for me. This is a table that is from this book, Getting to Maybe. And when I first read it, I realized that it perfectly captured my journey of providing dementia support as well as my failings. For years, I was looking for the quick fix or the recipe for dementia support. You know, for years I was thinking, well, what brilliant person's approach can I adopt and then implement? And a long time ago, I was known by some as the gentle care dictator for having such an approach. And that was me really trying to apply simple logics to a complex situation. But when all of these recipes, while they were really thoughtful and some of them were even really helpful, guess what? They all fell short of truly meeting the needs of all residents. Go figure, right? So I turned to science, and what does science give us? Well, it gives us blueprints for success. And yes, these wonderful evidence-based practice protocols for dementia care and support. I was so happy to finally have the blueprints. I thought, surely science is going to deliver on its promise of certainty and success. And so what did I do? I became a researcher, but guess what happened along the way? I became disillusioned pretty quickly. I learned that human beings are much more complex, especially human beings who are living with perceptions and experiences that are constantly shifting. And so I gave in and decided, well, I guess I'm just going to have to embrace the complexity of dementia care and support. And that's where I am today. I'm embracing the complexity. It's not the most comfortable place to be, but I find that it's far more powerful than the alternatives. So today I'm really leaning into uncertainty. I'm embracing complexity, and in complex situations, relationships and communication are the key. And so I'm channeling my inner sailor today, but not alone. I no longer delude myself with visions of being the hero with the answer. Instead, we're all in this boat together. And navigating the seas of dementia inclusion really requires enforce relationships and communication. So I want to provide a quick example about how these 3 pathways really help support a provider community, Carol Wood's retirement community. And maybe it will just help see how practical these pathways actually are. So Carol Woods has supported people living with dementia in Chapel Hill, North Carolina in an inclusive setting since opening its doors back in 1979. They're a campus with 500 residents, a very large, not-for-profit continuing care retirement community. And this is a statement about their dementia inclusive approach. They say, individuals are accepted for who they are in the moment, bolstered by the understanding that their perceptions and experiences of the world surrounding them is constantly shifting and may be quite different than our own. Every part of the community plays a compassionate, supportive role and works together proactively to create an environment that meets the well-being needs of each person. Sounds amazing, right? It is, yes it is, but the good people at Carol Woods would be the first to tell you that such an approach is not always easy. In fact, it's a lot of hard work and it's full of challenges. But wouldn't you rather work hard to proactively support the well-being and human rights of people living with dementia than to put that same amount of energy and that same amount of effort into responding downstream to distress? And as we explored in part 1, locked doors are a primary cause of distress. So Carol Woods really believes that each community member has the right to live freely in the manner and place of their choosing. But in 2018, they really wanted to reaffirm their values and deepen their commitment to inclusion through a new participatory action research initiative called the Quest Upstream. And I was thrilled to be their partner on the quest. So Carol Woods identified the issue. Participatory action research is a commitment to only doing research with people, communities of people, not on people. And so I was really thrilled to be their partner on such a worthwhile and exciting exploration. The real impetus for this reaffirmation, though, for Carol Woods was this growing call from residents who were not living with dementia to segregate and lock up residents living with dementia. And this call, it seemed really antithetical with the organization's deeply held values and beliefs. So what was really driving this shift among their community members? Well, really it was 2 things. First, there was really a growing number of residents living with dementia, and which we see in provider communities across North America. And then secondly, they were seeing an increase in those so-called dementia behaviors, or that's what the other residents called it at least. They were seeing an increase in expressions of distress, but the leaders at Carol Woods knew what was really going on. These aren't dementia behaviors. These are people in distress, and somehow they knew that they wanted to work to get back upstream. So Carol Woods launched this research project with me to really help them return to a place where well-being is proactively nurtured and the right to live freely is protected and maintained. And so this is just a short statement about the Quest Upstream. Our purpose was to really understand and document the requirements of inclusive living so that we could share those requirements with a broader field, while at the same time working proactively to better support the well-being of all community members. So the Quest Upstream really builds on these pathways to inclusion that I just presented: reframing dementia, focusing on well-being, and embracing complexity. And at its core is the premise that no matter the problem, community is the answer. Dementia inclusion requires the participation and support of every community member, not just the employee care partners. They can't achieve dementia inclusion alone. Everyone in the community has a role to play. And so what the Quest Upstream process looked to do was to open those spaces for every community member to engage in the promotion of well-being. And in doing so, it created a much better environment for inclusion. And so you could see here briefly the process. We hosted a number of neighborhood retreats where we invited family members, employee care partners, residents to all come together to really raise awareness about how to better support well-being and to identify some possible neighborhood well-being goals. And then the neighborhoods they worked. We actually used that framework of well-being that was developed in partnership with people living with dementia, and we went through that framework, and the neighborhoods created their own goals to better support each of those domains of well-being. But then what we also did was we did weekly neighborhood huddles. So again, everyone who's part of that neighborhood was invited to come and help develop an action plan and to reflect on actions as it related to those neighborhood well-being goals. And then the other part of our process was to launch daily shift huddles focused on well-being to really improve communication and strengthen teamwork and shared decision-making, again, all with the aim to better support well-being. So this wasn't shift report. It was not clinical in nature. It didn't take the place of shift report. Instead, these are daily shift huddles to focus every community member every day on the importance of well-being. So huddles, why huddles? A friend of mine, back when I was working at Schlegel Villages in Canada during my doctoral program, one of my partners up there created an acronym for Huddle. She calls it Having Useful Dialogue Daily Linking Everyone. I love that. So huddles. Why huddles? Well, huddles are an ideal vehicle to develop relationships and to strengthen communication, which we know are the prerequisites if we're going to really embrace complexity. And so through relationships and strong communication, people can work together to successfully navigate complex situations. And it can't just be something an organization does every once in a while. It really has to become a part of the DNA, a part of daily practice within the organization to really foster those relationships and to strengthen communication. This is a capacity building approach, though we called it the quest upstream because it really was a quest. This didn't happen overnight. My involvement as part of the quest, which is still ongoing at Carol Woods, was just over a year. It was a capacity building approach to community-wide engagement. And so it seemed to me like community members got on board with the quest upstream, a few people at a time. And then eventually over the course of a little more than a year, we really reached a tipping point where now almost every community member has done the work of reframing dementia, and they're really working together to promote well-being, and not just the well-being of people living with dementia, but the well-being of all community members, because what we all know and understand is that well-being is reciprocal. I can't support an elder with his or her well-being if I am currently experiencing ill-being. And so the quest upstream really focused on promoting the well-being of everyone within the community. And then finally, Carol Woods now has this amazing capacity through relationships and communication to navigate the complex situation of dementia inclusion as a community, and the benefits are, the effort is well worth the benefit. So it's just been an amazing project. Just a quick focus here on these daily shift huddles and how practically they help support resident well-being. So the neighborhoods use these huddles over time, a series of huddles, to really help get a well-informed resident well-being planning process launched. And so they use the first huddle, all 3 shifts, to really assess a specific resident's well-being. And then the next huddle, they'll come back together the next day. And again, all 3 shifts discuss what's working well to support well-being. And then at the next huddle, they'll come back together and consider ideas for how to better support the well-being of a particular elder. And then the next time they get together, it's really an open discussion, and they work collaboratively to develop a resident well-being plan. And then this is in skilled nursing as well as assisted living. And whenever appropriate, of course, they always take that well-being plan to meet with the resident and the family members and discuss it, finalize it, and then they take action as a team And then they always come back to reflect on how well that well-being plan is really working and what adjustments might be necessary in order to achieve the best outcome. And so very practical, a series of huddles to really engage the entire community in supporting each individual resident. And so it's just been a really powerful process, and what a great way to get diverse perspectives to really helping develop these resident well-being plans. So in brief, these were some of the reported outcomes that Carol Woods community members believe they experienced as a part of this Quest Upstream process. It's wonderful. They are seeing much less distress among residents. And because there's less distress, there's also fewer calls to lock up and segregate residents who are living with dementia. And so they really are proactively supporting well-being. And then the side product of that, another benefit, is obviously improved communication and teamwork. When someone is in distress, the team members, the community members are much more adept now at coming up with plans and approaches that will help resolve the distress, as opposed to simply assigning a person for one-to-one companionship. So they're seeing less reliance on one-to-one companionship, and instead better resident well-being plans. They're having success in achieving their well-being goals. And what we're seeing is really greater initiative among all community members, including residents who are not living with dementia, in their willingness to engage with residents who are living with dementia. And so again, those calls for segregation have really just fallen away. And then of course there's more enthusiasm and leadership among their direct support workers, more team members volunteering for leadership roles during huddles, which is exciting to see, and really just rising voices from community members who held important information, but were very quiet and didn't have a great vehicle for sharing their perspective. And now those huddles have really opened that up. So now decision-making is really well informed by everyone. We did a quantitative evaluation as a part of the Quest Upstream as well. We used something called a neighborhood team assessment, which demonstrated improvements on every single measure. I don't have enough time to go through all of that data with you on this webinar. So in the spirit of brevity, I'll just ask you all to take my word for it and let you know that my partners and I do hope to publish our journey and data soon. But it was really a great exploration. If people, get on these 3 pathways towards inclusion, community members can just achieve outstanding outcomes. We have done a little bit of blogging about it. You could read our blogs on changingaging.org. Pat Sprigg, the CEO of Carol Woods, and another one of my powerful teachers, she and I have written a little bit about the Quest. This is a picture of some of my partners at Carol Woods. They're sitting there with Janie, one of the residents there. She's holding up an award. It's a 2018 Facility Best Practice Award from Friends of Residents in Long-Term Care for their work on the Quest Upstream, which honored Carol Woods for providing exemplary programming which reflects person-centered values and supports the rights of residents and improves quality of care. And I just saw on Facebook that my partners are actively teaching other providers about the Quest Upstream through their involvement with Leading Age. And I'm so happy to be able to share their work with all of you today. So go team, and let's keep building what I like to call collective communicative capacity within organizations. And so now, just to wrap up, before we go to some Q&A, I just want to briefly highlight some additional practice-based examples of dementia-inclusive communities. The first one that you might want to go check out is from Century Care. They have a wonderful video online if you go to their website. Their headline on their webpage for memory care reads, "Redefining memory care, our doors are open!" exclamation mark. And they shared this video where they interviewed community members about their fears of unlocking and desegregated memory care, and then they interviewed people after they opened the doors. And so it's a really great video. it really resonated with me. But you know, if you look in the picture on the left, you see a little doggy door in their locked door to memory care. And an elder in the video describes how when the doors were locked, how he saw a hand coming out of the doggy door as an elder who was locked in was trying so hard to get out of this locked environment. And oh, when I heard that on the video, it just wow, you know, it just really makes you reflect on the psychological harm of being locked in an environment. So Century Care has unlocked their doors. Carol Woods has always been inclusive. Century Care has done the work of unlocking their doors. It's a really great video. I encourage you to watch it and to read more about their story online. Sherbrooke Community Center in Saskatoon also has a wonderful video. Actually, it's floating around on Facebook. It's pretty easy to find if you search for Sherbrooke Community and Inclusion. They have a really wonderful video about their recent effort to desegregate people living with dementia. And there's also a wonderful article written about their journey published by the Saskatoon Star Phoenix, a great article titled "Era of Segregating People with Dementia Ending at Sherbrooke Long-Term Care Home." It's a wonderful article. And the resident in the photo on the left, his name is Don Wilmot, and he lived in one of Sherbrooke Community Center's secured, i.e. locked neighborhoods. But now Don and other fellow residents with dementia have more freedom within the whole community, thanks to the technology that's actually pictured on the right. And so you see, it looks like a watch, but what it really is some type of GPS that helps folks know where people are so that they can be free to come and go and to walk around. The Sherbrooke community is calling this initiative Dementia Inclusive. It's their Dementia Inclusive, and they're really working hard to guarantee freedom for each resident. And Don Wilmot calls this Dementia Inclusive initiative, quote, ideal. It is ideal in his mind. And so it's really great to check out what's happening at Sherbrooke as an organization who is reintegrating people living with dementia. Two other quick highlights. I don't know if any of you caught this in McKnight Senior Living back in June, but executives from Thrive, which is a senior living organization based in Atlanta, there's a very interesting article where they talk about how they had to do away with their memory care communities, that approach, which they called insufficient in meeting the needs of elders. And let me just read specifically what these two executives say. These are quotes from the McKnight article. They said the standalone memory care communities represented a, quote, philosophical disconnect for Thrive in that they segregated residents from the rest of society, company executives said. And the president, Les Stretch, said this: this experience has deepened our belief that the traditional model for standalone memory care in the US is insufficient to meet residents' needs, and operating these 4 memory care only communities for the last few years has taught us that we simply can't compromise. People prosper when living in true community with each other, regardless of age or ability. And so, so Thrive is on a journey. They sold off their 4 memory care communities and are moving into more inclusive directions. And then just this month, another wonderful article in McKnight's, it came from Vassar Bird, who is the executive director of Rose Villa in Portland, Oregon. And she published a wonderful article about 5 lessons that they have learned by not segregating memory care residents. And not to steal too much of her thunder there, I do hope that you'll go read that McKnight's article. But what Vassar Bird writes about these 5 lessons, I really appreciated them. She says, number one, dementia-friendly activities and programming and person-centered architecture and design that appeals to residents living with dementia appeal to all people. Like, why are we reserving that great design or those wonderful programs just for people living with dementia? And then she says, memory illness is a dynamic, changing disease that progresses in different ways for each person who has it. So thinking back to part one, last week we talked about the fallacy of homogeneity, this myth and misunderstanding that there is some memory care approach that we can apply to all people living with dementia in a particular stage, etc. I would call that trying to apply simple or complicated thinking to a complex situation. Number three, she says, make your entire campus dementia friendly and inclusive, and train all staff in memory illness. Train everybody how to support the needs of people who are living with dementia, and you'll be doing them a great service. So many professional care partners like myself are also family care partners. So go ahead and share that education broadly. Fourth, Vassar says, people with Alzheimer's function at a higher level socially and emotionally for a longer period than they would if they were segregated and only able to interact with people who share the same disease. And that is actually empirically backed as well. And then fifth, removing anyone from the fabric of the community they belong to impoverishes the rest of the community as much as it may underserve the person with the illness. Elders need community, and guess what? Communities need elders. By locking away people who are living with dementia, we are cutting ourselves off from an invaluable resource. People living with dementia have a lot to contribute to their families, to their communities, and to our nation. We have to keep people living with dementia connected to their communities. It's vital for the health and growth of our community to have people living with dementia in it. So with that, maybe next time I can come back sometime in the future, or maybe you could just pick up the book that Al and I are writing to explore these other 3 positive pathways to inclusion: negotiating upside and downside risk, leveraging technology respectfully, and creating inclusive environments. But that's all I'm going to share today because I wanted to leave some time for Q&A.
Oh, Jennifer, wow, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing these stories and for really sharing what is becoming, it appears to be a growing trend for people to reevaluate whether or not we should be segregating or not segregating. So let's get right to questions. Does unlocking doors refer to doors within the community, or to unlocking the doors to the outside, such as the front door?
Right. Well, what I've seen is a continuum. And so some communities start with unlocking the internal door because that's their level of comfort. And it's a really positive step, I think, in the right direction, while other organizations have just gone ahead and just unlocked all the doors. And so they're moving that perimeter. And some organizations have just removed it. And so Carroll Woods, for instance, which my partners in North Carolina, like I was saying, they have 500 residents. They have a very large campus. I can't recall how many acres it's on, but it's really large. There's no locked doors anywhere. And people are free to walk inside, outside, walk across the entire campus. Whereas another organization I'm familiar with up in Canada, where Dr. Al Power does research with Schlegel villages, one of their villages did the work to unlock an internal door for memory care. And so they haven't reintegrated the people who are living on that neighborhood, but they have opened up their access to the full village. So I think it just really depends on the organization.
All right, and how do you balance the needs of safety and people who are prone to wandering.
Yeah, that was one of the questions we explored at Carol Woods, because other residents there had a really valid question. They said, you know, you're talking about supporting the rights of people living with dementia, but what about our rights? What about our right to not have people in my personal space, for instance? And what we did was, this is where the importance of engaging all community members, where it becomes so important, because we have to provide education. When people, the other residents, learned more about reframing dementia as well as effective communication strategies, it gave them greater comfort having a person living with dementia enter their space. They felt better equipped to have a positive interaction. But then what we really saw was that by proactively supporting well-being of residents who were living with dementia, a lot of those so-called behaviors like wandering, things like that, they actually were radically diminished. When the community works more proactively to engage people in meaningful activities, when the community is working more proactively to ensure that people have companionship, when they're working more proactively to ensure that the space is dementia friendly and inclusive, and that there is better wayfinding cues, etc., what they found was that the number of people who were, you know, so-called wandering was really diminished. And in the cases where people still enjoyed exploring their physical environment, the other residents were better equipped with effective communication strategies, and it just has not been much of a problem. The calls for locked and segregated memory care at Carol Woods have pretty much gone away completely.
Well, that's amazing. And, you know, we've got some time. You know, you and I were talking a little bit about the growth of the concept of a dementia village. Could you just speak a little bit to that and perhaps share some of your thoughts about the dementia village that is becoming very popular in the Netherlands? And from what I understood from a call this morning is kind of, I guess, contemplating other places across the globe where it's showing up. People are modeling after that concept.
Right. Well, if for folks who were on part one last week, I shared a story about one of my partners and teachers, Phyllis Fair, who's living with dementia, and her impassioned plea to people during a panel discussion I facilitate on the subject to see the village model for what it is, which is still a form of segregation. The village model may be beautiful, it could have really nice amenities, but it is still a locked and segregated form of care and support for people living with dementia. And she didn't want people to buy the illusion. In fact, it's a mirage of an inclusive community. And I think our work as a field is to create genuine inclusive communities. And so, you know, it was funny. This actually came up. I helped support the Dementia Friendly Nevada initiative here, and I was working with members of Dementia Friendly Washoe County, and one of our members was really excited because she had seen a news segment on the village model of memory care, and she thought, wouldn't this be wonderful? We really need to create one of these here in Washoe County where I live. And I thought, well, isn't this kind of ironic, because we're sitting as a part of a group called Dementia Friendly and Inclusive Washoe County, because what we're trying to do is create real inclusive communities. We're doing the work so that people living with dementia can experience genuine community, not a hyper reality or some kind of, you know, Disneyland version of community. I love visiting Disneyland. I love it. It's so much fun. I think it's awesome, but I don't want to live there. I don't want to live in the Magic Kingdom. I want to live in Washoe County. And I think that my partners living with dementia feel the same way. For a lot of folks, it's a lot better option than some of the alternatives, whether it's an institutional nursing home or a run-of-the-mill assisted living. So I think that it's an attractive. It's attractive. I think people like the village model. I think it gives family members, in particular, a real sense of comfort that they're doing something great for their loved one. And I'm sure that some people really enjoy it. But at the end of the day, it's still a form of segregation. It is still locked, and the people who live there are only people living with dementia. That's not real community. And I think we could do better. Susan,
I think that,
yeah, I was going to say, you, Susan, have taught me a lot about there ain't nothing like the real thing. And whether we're talking about a fake cat or a fake community, that says something about the way we view people living with dementia and potentially devalue them. And so maybe you could share more about that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jennifer. I think for me, if we are ever going to make progress in destigmatizing dementia, by having people segregated in a dementia village that is a fabricated type of community, and keeping them isolated from the rest of society, that just feels that it further perpetuates that stigma. And, we will do a webinar at some point, I think it's in April at some point, more about the real versus fake experiences, speaking more to the use of robotics. And, while people tell me all the time, well, that person living with dementia doesn't know the difference, and that's bringing a sense of comfort. And while that may be true to some degree, the devaluation and the diminished worth that is occurring in that exchange and in that thought process, and the way we see that person as less than because they can't tell the difference between something real or fake, and robbing that person of the opportunity to be in a real relationship. And you use the word relationship many times in creating dementia inclusion. And I think that's what is also important, is that we don't have relationships with things that are not living. And no matter how real they might look, I just think, as you said, community is the answer. And really having that opportunity to be in real relationships matters. And the value we place and the intrinsic worth on a person is oftentimes so influenced by how we see that person. Mm-hmm. So this is great. Here's another. Can you give us an idea of what you'd suggest a resident of an inclusive community do to help someone who has entered their private space?
Oh, wow. Well, first, to not alarm the person, not to be alarmed, to embrace this person as your neighbor. And I think about how I feel when unannounced one of my neighbors knocks on my front door and, I'm in my pajamas, and, it may not be an ideal time for a visit, but I open my door and I'm friendly, courteous to my neighbor, and see if I might be able to help them in some way, because that's what neighbors do. And I think not being alarmed is really helpful. And I think equipping residents with effective communication strategies is so important. Consider what training residents who are not living with dementia have had about dementia. Care partners have these effective communication strategies because they have been through, maybe 12 or 30 hours or more of dementia education. So if we're going to create inclusive communities, every community member needs to have those skills to be able to engage with a person who's living with dementia and identify what that person's needs are. What is that person looking for? Maybe it's just companionship, which the resident who's not living with dementia may or may not wish to provide. But maybe they're just looking for their own room. maybe they're looking for a place to sit down. Maybe they're looking for the closest bathroom. But if we don't engage in trying to understand the needs of the person, and we just turn them away, it actually increases distress. And so to create inclusive communities, every community member has to play an active and supportive role, including the other residents. But when we ask people at Carroll Woods why they have chosen to call Carroll Woods their home, for so many of the people who live there, what I've heard them say is that they love Carroll Woods' value of inclusion, and they are comforted by knowing that if they develop dementia in the future, that they will still be regarded as active, full community members, and that they will not be locked away. And so residents are willing, for the most part, I think people are more than willing to engage in educational opportunities that will better equip them in being good neighbors.
Well, I love that, and I so appreciate it. Even that first reframe dementia. I think when you reframe it from a biomedical model to a more social relational, it really kind of changes the narrative. So great response. This was an incredible presentation, and to your hint that we should have you back, hint taken. And we will definitely plan for another time. So thank you, Jennifer, for joining us. And for those of you on the call, I want to let you know of another amazing mind that will be joining us for a webinar on February 27 at 3, Elder Care Design, a concept that empowers elders and fosters multi-generational relationships that benefit everyone. This will be done by Dr. Emmy Kyoda, a friend of Jennifer's, a friend of Dr. Al Power, and somebody that will also radically help us to think differently in our approaches to supporting people living with dementia. In addition to that, we've got a few other things coming up. We've got a workshop, a greenhouse workshop on February 26th in Washington, D.C. You can get more information on our website. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you've gotten as much from it as I have, and we hope to see you again. Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.